Cameron, tell us, how did you get your start in the oil and gas industry?
I was born in Houston. I grew up in Colorado. I've been surrounded by it kind of my whole life, a bit unknowingly. My family was in the business as well. I went to school to study engineering. Didn't originally plan to end up in oil and gas, but was fortunate enough to get an opportunity with ExxonMobil down here in Houston, and that's where I kind of developed my passion for the oil and gas industry, and just kind of spiraled from there.
Okay. Well, that's your entry into the industry, so tell us about the path you got to get where you are right now.
Certainly. So, as I mentioned, started on the engineering side at ExxonMobil, but I think quickly learned that ultimately taking a more broad approach to the understanding of the entire industry rather than just a specific engineering subset was where I wanted to spend my time within the business. So pivoted from engineering over to the investment banking side, and ended up with an opportunity here in Houston with Lazard in their investment banking group. Focused mostly on the upstream side, and after Lazard, got an offer from InCap Investments here in town to work in their upstream portfolio group for a handful of years before shifting over to the public side of the market, and I worked at Citadel, focused on upstream oil and gas public investments. Was there for a handful of years as well before starting along with Jeff Bartlett and Sky Callentine Pontem.
Yeah, I'm curious, going from engineering to finance. I'd say it's not like a normal path, but actually I think in this industry probably is a little more common. But what do you think having that engineering background gives you to the finance world in oil and gas specifically?
Absolutely. I think finance universally, but maybe more in this industry than any other. Engineering gives you the benefit of having the problem-solving capabilities, of being able to evaluate a problem and ultimately, engineering your way into a solution. So, especially given the volatile landscape that we've seen for the last decade or so in this business, that's been particularly helpful with the transition over to finance and investing. Wonderful.
So, what advice would you have for other young professionals in this industry going forward?
I think that ultimately, I think success in many people's careers in this industry is ultimately dictated by their ability to be flexible. We all start off kind of in our specific silo within this business, and we're often presented situations where there's material we're not familiar with that's probably essential to the fulsome understanding of the business. And so, for me, what I always suggest is to make sure you're getting as much exposure to as much of this business as you possibly can at any time. And if you don't know something, go and learn as much as you can about it, because that's going to make you a more well-rounded and ultimately effective participant in this industry.
And we all know it's an up and down industry in terms of markets. So there's a lot of challenges that you're going to face in a career. So what challenges have you faced? How did you conquer them?
Yeah, I tend to say that I happen to have some of the worst timing in the business. I ended up at ExxonMobil right during the Deepwater Horizon disaster. I was in an offshore group in particular, and so that was certainly an interesting way to enter the industry. I moved over to Lazard from there, which is primarily a boutique restructuring bank in probably the hottest M&A market that we've seen in oil and gas. And then landed at InCap, kind of with the fall from $100+ oil to $20 oil over that period as well. So I think, volatility is something I've experienced firsthand many times. And then finally, obviously, on the public market side with what we've been seeing with how public investors have been treating the upstream space. So I think that being able to manage that and build your skill set in those kind of times of trial has been really important for me.
Okay. I have to ask, I just want to follow up here. So an early experience you have is the whole Macondo thing in Deepwater Horizon. What kept you in the industry? Why did you not pack it in there and say?
It's a good question. I think it really does. For me, what was most impressive about it was the resiliency of the industry. Even at that moment when it seemed like, it was the darkest period, at least in my career from an industry perspective. There was always hope that technology, which has driven the advancement of this industry for, probably the history of it, would find a way to forge through. In Macondo, but certainly, in the shale revolution, and even up to today, that ultimately the resiliency of this industry and the people within it would find a way to forge forward. And so that's probably the most attractive thing that kept me going in spite of what was going on around me.
Care to venture any opinions on where we think the market might go?
Yeah, if I knew, if only. So it's obviously an incredibly transitory period for the industry. I guess I've been fortunate enough to have a front row seat into being alongside the minds who have ultimately decided, how they think it should be shaped. And so I've gotten quite a few opinions on what it should look like. For me, ultimately, we have to be a sustainable business, long term, right? You have to be able to build your business to be able to generate returns above your cost of capital. And as simple as that sounds, it has been just about impossible to do over the course of the recent history of this business. And so to the degree that we aren't able to do that, I think we're going to continue to struggle. But my hope is, and certainly, part of what we're trying to do at Pontem is to be able to build businesses that can do that. And so, back to the resiliency point, I think that's hopefully where the industry is heading.
Right, and we're sitting here today talking about young leaders, 40 under. Do you think that changes, that work towards that goal changes with the younger generation?
Yeah, I think that it seems like every generation of oil and gas professionals are forged by the trials that they've experienced and particularly their young careers. And so I think our generation is no different than that, and except for maybe in this specific situation, the micro-cyclicality of the industry has forced us to face just about every problem you can possibly imagine over the last decade. So hopefully that sets us up well to steward this industry going forward into what I hope to be its future, which is the ability to generate those attractive returns.
Yeah, I guess when I think about it, if you're in your 12th, 15th year of this career, if you've been in it the whole time, you've gone from the shale revolution to the crash to back to rising,
right?
All kinds of stuff.
To jubilance, back to crash again, and then again. Yeah.
And then this, whatever we call this year. So speaking of this year, now, obviously work-life balance for someone in the prime of their career. How do you deal with that, and how's it been for you?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we've all probably had a lot of jobs that have required a substantial amount of time that we could probably step back and say, I could have easily said that a balance was impossible to maintain, given that situation. It just comes down to ultimately how you prioritize, what's important to you. And for me, and certainly many others in this industry, family comes above all else. And so it's been important to me to find a way to maintain that balance. Thankfully, I have a very forgiving wife and young children. But that's ultimately never going to change in terms of being able to manage that. So it's just a question of prioritizing it and making it what's most important to you.
Okay. I'll give you a final question. So what's this year done for you? Like, how's it changed your outlook on pretty much anything, but in particular the business?
No, it's a good question. So I think what this year has done for me is that, with us kind of initiating Pontem and striking it out kind of in this environment that we'd all agree is new and interesting, I think it's reaffirmed my belief that this industry will always present opportunity. There will always be resiliency, and the question ultimately becomes like, do you have the entrepreneurial capacity or interest to be able to capture that? And so I've been reinvigorated this year, I think, to be able to see that in spite of how difficult the landscape looks, that there is that opportunity.
Wonderful. Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Mhm.